Hello everyone, this is Gottbeard. This is going to be my Bolt Escape guide video. This is a video that I've been wanting to do for a while now. Bolt Escape is a pretty misunderstood skill, and I really feel like it could use a good guide. Essentially, for this particular episode, I want to talk about the history of Bolt Escape. Kind of giving a chance for those who didn't live through all the changes to Bolt Escape to understand where it came from. A lot of older Sorks are doing things because they know the history of Bolt Escape, and people coming into the game have no clue about where it's come from, and so this is my opportunity to sort of impart that knowledge to you. Maybe you can use it, maybe you can't. I would also like to hit in this video Bolt Escape Basics. That'll be a general skill and morph walkthrough with some other basic tips about Bolt Escape frequency, why do we bolt, range information, how far does it actually take you when you bolt, things like that. Anyway, moving on. The history of Bolt Escape. Okay, so you have to imagine in the beginning of the game we had soft caps. The game was actually designed and balanced for itself. In my opinion, patch 1.2 was the closest this game ever got to balanced. It was best foot forward because it was still moving in the direction of the original designer. Somewhere along the lines, someone else took hold of the reins and started doing loop-de-loops. It's apparent. I mean, you can look at sets like Stygian now and go, who made this and why? Because there's been so many mechanic changes that there's just dead sets that don't play into the current mechanics. Anyway, back in the day, you didn't need to super stack magic and spell power just to be able to kill somebody, which meant that you could have a more fleshed out character. And when you looked at the available itemization and what you wanted to run for yourself, a lot of sorcerers picked cost reduction. That's where the meta pushed them. As a result, you ended up with a class that could overbolt. Now, this was a little bit unbalanced in a lot of people's opinion. I personally didn't mind it. I felt like when I was playing a Sork, it didn't give me that much of an advantage edge. And still playing a Sork now, there's not that much difference once you know what you're doing. And when I wasn't playing a sorcerer, it really wasn't that hard to kill them because I would basically just give them enough rope to hang themselves. Sorcerers aren't running because they don't like to fight. They're running because they're trying to get out of a bad situation. If you just let them run, they'll come back on their own. So that's what I would do, and when they come back, I would kill them. I would be ready for them. Each fight was whether or not they could get away from me, and I thought it was particularly challenging and fun. I didn't mind it, but enough people minded it that it was, under fire and nerfed. But I really feel like it all started out because the itemization pushed us towards cost reduction. So at that time, you had sorcerers who could bolt 40 times in a row. Anyway, this brought about our first balance nerf to Bolt Escape, where ZeniMax essentially added a debuff after your first bolt. If you bolt again in the 4 seconds that debuff lasts, it will charge you double for your bolt. At this time, cost reduction still applied to that extra cost. This was a balance change where ZeniMax didn't look at the meta, the itemization that was causing the problem in the first place, and they just did a blanket change, and it wasn't effective. It brought us down from 40 bolts in a row, which is, in my opinion, crazy, to 30 bolts in a row, which isn't that much different. So if your goal was to change that problem, that wasn't the way to do it. Anyway, while all this is happening, there's also a design change to charges that is affecting Bolt Escape and the rest of the game in a weird way. So let's go back and talk about originally how charges work. You pushed a button to charge to get close to somebody, and you charged to where they were when you pushed the button. This made for a real free-forming combat system. If somebody was running from you, you could continue to charge them, and it became about your stat management. Maybe you shield charged and then heavied as they ran away so that you could shield charge again. There was all kinds of different play for it, and it felt like you were chasing somebody when you were charging them. It was nice. Anyway, they opted for this. Basically, there was this problem that was happening where sometimes it would desync a character. The computer would get confused about where a person actually was because of the old charge system. And occasionally it would get you stuck in terrain. You'd charge somebody and you'd end up under the world. Okay, well, first of all, that under the world stuff still happens. Anyway, Cinemax couldn't figure out a way to fix it, so they decided to implement this new charge system where now when you charge somebody, they are locked in place until you arrive. So in a sense, every charge in the game has a kicker bind effect on it, which in my opinion is just so strong. In fact, the Stampede, the other morph of Crit Rush, actually used to have a bind on it. So they deemed that a bind on a charge was strong enough to be its own morph, but they were comfortable giving every charge in the game a bind. Whoa. Anyway, essentially, this is what changes when you have a system charge bind. First of all, counter bind mechanics like shuffle and retreating maneuvers, they don't work on this bind. Okay, so now you have counterplay to counterplay through a system mechanic. No good. Second, since it binds you in place, it actually makes it to where the next guy can charge you, and the next guy can charge you, and you get stuck down in this infinite cascade of permabind charges, where suddenly a character who's invested in mobility is just a sitting duck for a monkey-humping, charge-mashing Zerg. I don't think that's very good, and it makes your combat play feel real clunky. I mean, I could just imagine what a terrible failure Halo would have been if every time you got shot, you got bound in place. You know, people would have hated that. People want to be able to move freely when they fight each other, not be hiccuped in a glitchy way. And anyway, the charge change really mattered for Sork because although they're one of the few people who have tools to sort of fight against it, it made it to where if you get caught out by one person, suddenly you're at extreme risk of getting caught out by an entire team. And there's just not anyone in the game who can deal with that right now. So that was a huge change. We also had a directional bolt escape nerf. Used to be that you bolted in the direction that your camera was facing. Now, I don't have any clue why they changed this one. But now you bolt in the direction that your character's facing. Now, this does introduce some interesting counterplay for bolt escape in that binds will make it to where you can't change your character's angle, so now you have to bolt in the direction that you're bound to face in unless you dodge roll to break the bind so that you can reposition. I personally don't like this change just because, again, it makes it feel muddy when you're playing the character. I want to be able to swivel my camera, look a direction, and go that way. And there's also a little bit of unfairness because now if I'm in one of these aforementioned charge binds, these perma binds that only come from a charge cascade spam, I can't actually maneuver my character the way that I want to or need to unless I do some kind of gimmick to change my facing. Okay, so moving on, we finally get to the first crippling change, and this is where they changed it to where the cost accumulation that was happening from the Bolt Escape debuff, suddenly it was ignoring cost reduction. So now this has actually started to hurt, and you started to get towards a 15 bolt top bolt, and you're out of mana after those 15 bolts. And this was a point where it started to get a little bit harder to bolt escape, but they weren't done yet. They moved in and added yet again an infinite cost accumulation, to where now that debuff not only refreshes, but if you stack the debuff, it will stack on itself, and you will end up in just shredding your mana bar if you try to bolt. Well, this has some inherent problems, and we'll get into that later, but when we analyze why we bolt, there are often times where we have to double and triple bolt. I wouldn't be so mad at this if it just been done a little bit better. Like, if the duration was a hard set 4 seconds, and after 4 seconds, no matter how many bolts you had, it reset. That would at least be more fair. That way it wasn't some kind of permanent thing that was going to force you to stop, because nothing's going to force them from stopping their point their reticle at you and mash their charge button times 5. 5 people mashing their charges at you. If you run out of mana, they don't care. They're gonna get you. So I just don't really feel like this permanent accumulation is a fair way to go. But that's what this guide's for, to talk about it and talk about ways around it. So we'll get there. The last nerf to Bolt Escape was the nerf to the Ball of Light duration. Ball of Light was a very useful defensive skill, albeit a little glitchy, and now the duration of the ball is so short that it's almost worthless. You have to have a very specific build in mind to choose that morph. Now, not to leave out Streak. Streak had its fair share of nerfs, but in a weird way. Streak needs to be spammed, because now instead of using it for mobility, you're also using it for CC and damage. That adds a couple of extra casts per second, which with this new cost accumulation that ignores cost reduction into infinity, it's actually really painful to try to use Streak those extra few times for CC and damage. Anyway, that is the history of Bolt Escape, and now that we have gone through all that, you kind of have an understanding of where it's come from, so that now as we move forward, you can sort of have that foundation. Now, before I talk about skill morphs and more technical information, I'd like to talk about just general tips for bolt frequency and how it feels to you as you play it. So essentially, your first and second bolt, you'll almost not even notice them. However, your third bolt, while the debuff is active, will be very costly. You want to really think about that third bolt. Generally, it's worth investing it if you think you'll get away, but you'll pay the price if you don't. When you get in fourth bolt territory, you're in no man's land. If you decide to invest, it better be a do or die situation, and be prepared to have to recover, because your mana is gonna be trashed. Anything above that is a range you don't want to be in. Now, having said that, if you have to bolt, you have to bolt. But it's got to be a do or die situation, and your ability to rationalize in the middle of the heat of combat whether it's worth it to bolt again is now a new skill set for Sorcerer. This is very important for you. That just remember that 1, 2, no big deal. 3, 4, no man's land. Only do it if you have to. And generally you're going to want to stall afterwards. So this brings me to talking about, like, well, how do you maintain your speed? Let's add some numeric values to these speed checks. Let's say that, a medium armor chaser moves at about an 8 speed, and your general movement is at about a 5 speed, but you and burst can move at a 12 speed. Well, that 12 speed is how you get your lead. You have to factor in that 8 speed stam's gap closer, but once you have that lead, all you're trying to do is maintain the lead ahead of the gap close. So if you're moving at 5 and he's moving at 8, he's going to make up that lead pretty quickly. So that's where skills like Boundless Storm come in play, and judicious use of sprint. As you're running from a group of people and you have that lead, you need to be thinking about it in terms that I've described. You want to maintain that lead, because the moment that one of them hits that gap closer, you're done. You're pinned in place, and while you're pinned, the rest are catching up. A new charge is going to come in. You're going to get stuck in place. So don't be afraid to use your Boundless Storm to get some movement speed boost outside of Bolt, tap your sprint every now and then. Just let it go down a few ticks, and then walk and let it ride up a few ticks. And by tapping your sprint button, you'll boost yourself up from that casual 5 speed to like a 7 speed, which means that that 8 speed stand build is not getting caught up to you as quick as he wants to. And then you're stalling out for that 4 seconds so that you can bolt again. Be real careful when you're doing this about knowing terrain. If you bolt off of a hill and have to drop, you're losing a lot of time. Sometimes it's worth it to lose a few meters to make sure that you don't dead drop on a bolt. What I mean by that is, instead of straight line running, turn and bolt into the side of a hill so that you don't dead fall. It's all about maintaining that lead. When we get into episode 2, we'll talk about bolt tricks, and through these tricks you can use terrain to maintain your lead. For instance, bypassing a rock that they have to go around. There's also skills that you can leave down for them, like dropping a Daedric Mines that they have to run around while you go through a more streamlined course through terrain. This makes them have to spread out and do things differently. Maybe a volcanic rune, things like that. Caltrips even can be really funny on a sorcerer who's running. So that is tips on bolt frequency and sort of how to run across country and maintain that lead. So I want to move on and talk about why it is that we bolt in the first place. You tend to, when you first start playing sword, just want to bolt every time, all the time. But that's not why bolt is there. Repositioning in a fight does almost nothing except set you up for a gap closer. Bolt is only there as a repositioning tool to get out of gap closing range so that you can maintain a lead. It is also used for superior terrain movement. A sorcerer who has mastered bolt, and again this will be touched on more in episode 2, can just live inside of terrain better than any other class. And that's real important. That's the second use of bolt. And then of course if you have the streak morph, CC becomes another one. Disorienting a group by streaking through them is a very useful tool. So that's kind of why we bolt. We don't bolt for movement. It's the immediate separation outside of charge range that makes bolt strong as a movement. Once we're free of charge range, if we're still using bolt, we are trashing our mana bar and it's no good. So that's kind of something you need to understand as you play a Sorc, especially a Sorc who relies on bolt escape. Make sure your bolt escapes count. If you just use it because you're using it and he gap closes right back up to you, then what have you done besides trash your mana bar? Nothing. Okay, so now let's move to the more technical side of things. We're going to find out this important bit of information. How far does bolt escape actually go? So let me show you how I'm going to do this really quickly. So I'm going to go to the resto line and look at the tooltip info on Healing Springs, and you notice that it has an 8-meter radius. It's a 16-meter diameter, so we can use it as a sort of ruler of sorts to find out how far does bolt actually go. So you see me here just lining it up, making sure that I can get it as perfect as possible. I want it on my tippy toes and right at the door. I think, yeah, that's it right there. Yeah, okay. Bolt, bam. So with that test, we can roughly see that bolt escape goes 15 meters roughly. Now we know that the gap closers range from 22 to 25 meters, so we can use that to know we need 2 bolts to get out of range of a gap closer. It's very important to know how far bolt escape goes. So now we can take a look at the actual skill. So you can see here, this is the skill. This is how much it costs for me naked. It's morph choice is really up to you. I personally like Ball of Lightning because I don't like stray projectiles catching me, but Streak has a lot of utility. For the CC, group CC is hard to come by, and you've got it in spades with Streak. So here I'm just going to demonstrate the cost increase after a couple of bolts. There's that dreaded 4 bolt, and you can see that it's pretty expensive. So here we're going to get up to an 8-9 bolt, and you can see my mana's trashed and the cost is just astronomical. And that will conclude episode 1's bolt escape guide. Make sure and tune in for episode 2, where I talk about advanced bolt escape tricks and how to counter some of the chase tactics that are going to happen to you while you're trying to reposition in Cyrodiil. I appreciate the support, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it and learned something. Gottbeard signing out.